There's a famous expression that goes, "A luxury once enjoyed becomes a necessity." I would add to that quote and say that it can also become an obsession. If you've ever flown with Emirates, Qatar Airways, Etihad, Oman Air, or Turkish Airlines, odds are you feel this way. But have you ever actually wondered why they're so good? Yes, the pockets of most of these airlines are deeper than European or East Asian competitors. And yes, it's a matter of prestige for the country to have a good airline. But these aren't the true reasons when you dig a little deeper. Wouldn't it technically be smartest for these countries to run the airlines like European or US carriers, many of which are extremely profitable in good times? They have all the resources to create this type of airline, yet they keep pouring money into their onboard experience to ensure they are one step ahead of the competition, whether with luxurious seating in all cabins like on Qatar Airways, showers and bars like on Emirates, or industry-leading catering like on Turkish. The truth is that these airlines have no choice but to be the best. That may sound extreme, but it's true. Here is why. So, what do these Middle Eastern carriers I mentioned have in common? They all have a large portion of connecting traffic. If you really stretch this example I'll be making in this video, you can see a pattern where the less visited the destination, the better the airline becomes, with a lot of caveats of course. More people visit Dubai and Istanbul than Doha or Abu Dhabi, and Emirates and Turkish have worse hard products than Qatar Airways and Etihad. So what exactly is the reason these airlines are so good? To explain it, we can break the industry into two types of airlines. But may not be possible unless passengers could connect to destinations on either end of the flight. So small cities benefit by having more connectivity as well, which unlocks thousands of destinations around the world with just a few connections. So this is the dilemma. For people living in medium to large cities, they have the choice between flying non-stop or connecting elsewhere to get where they need to go. But connecting doesn't make sense unless doing so is cheaper, right? Well, there is one other reason why a passenger might choose to connect. Enter the birth of super connectors. The airlines not only benefiting from the hub and spoke model, but created solely based on this model. Emirates, Qatar Airways, Etihad, Turkish Airlines, and several others are based in one of, if not the best, geographic locations for an airline hub in the world. Within 6 hours from their hubs, you can reach most of East, South, and Central Asia, much of Africa, and all of Europe. In that flight time, you can reach around 6 billion people, most of the world's population, in half the time it took Mr. Beast to say PewDiePie 100,000 times. Now the reason the Middle East is perfect for superconnectors, besides its central location, actually has a lot to do with aircraft efficiency. Think of how an aircraft burns fuel. It burns fuel mostly based on weight. The more fuel you carry, the more fuel you burn. And the more fuel you burn, the more you need to carry. Now this doesn't apply to extremely short flights where takeoff and climb represent a significant portion of the flight time, since this is the most fuel intensive part of a flight. The sweet spot for most aircraft lies between 2,000 and 3,000 miles. Here's the fuel burn chart for the Boeing 777-200, which shows the lowest fuel burn per minute of flying is achieved approximately between 2,200 and 2,700 nautical miles. Here are the destinations you can reach within 3,000 miles of Dubai. That is a pretty darn efficient hub location from an aircraft perspective and from a population perspective. When starting this type of airline that relies almost solely on connections, there are two approaches the airline could take. Either they launch flights to big cities on either side of their hub and try to steal passengers from major airlines serving those routes non-stop. Or they can fly to secondary cities on either end and become the only one-stop option for traveling between those places. Here's an example. If they choose to connect big cities, they could launch flights to London, Paris, Frankfurt, Cairo, and Accra, connecting them to Bangkok, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Delhi. The truth is that most of these cities already have non-stop connections from airlines based on either side, so the Middle Eastern connector isn't really adding any value here. So an example of the other option would be to connect major European cities with secondary cities like Chiang Mai in Thailand or Penang in Malaysia. This would compete against the alternative of flying from a European city to Bangkok and connecting there to Chiang Mai or Penang. So it still isn't entirely unique. The one situation where they can create a truly unique market proposition is operating from cities like Berlin, Edinburgh, Kigali, or Kiev to these cities like Chiang Mai or Penang, because this opens doors for hundreds of combinations for one-stop connections between secondary cities. And as you can probably guess, it works better the more secondary cities are added to the network. The problem is that these cities usually aren't where the money is, and hence, every Middle Eastern national carrier has chosen to focus on large cities. Now, no one in their right mind, well, besides myself and every AvGeek I know, would choose to fly a longer or more inconvenient route if there was no distinguishing factor between the nonstop and the connecting option. So, how can airlines compete? Well, the typical way is through price. This is what we see with all European carriers and explains why it's cheaper to fly Lufthansa from Paris to Bangkok via Frankfurt than to fly non-stop from Frankfurt to Bangkok. Airlines charge a premium for non-stop flights, and connecting flights are sold at a discount. So, the Middle Eastern carriers simply need to charge lower prices than the non-stop options. But wait a minute, there's something missing from this equation. Who chooses a more inconvenient but cheaper option? Well, more cost-sensitive passengers. Those who can afford the convenience of flying non-stop will most certainly still choose it. Should Middle Eastern carriers just appeal to low-yield passengers? This is what airlines like Pegasus, Air Arabia, and several others have chosen to do. But this also limits their possibilities in terms of network and, of course, prestige. None of these true low-cost Middle Eastern carriers are state-owned. If you want a quality national airline, you have to take the other route. And this brings us to the most simple answer I can give you to why Middle Eastern airlines have no choice but to be the best. There really is only one way to compete for premium customers who could normally afford to fly non-stop. And that is by offering a vastly better onboard experience than the non-stop option would provide. Let me repeat that. The only way Middle Eastern carriers can compete given the inconvenience of flying with them is by offering a better experience. Not only that, but the superior experience still needs to be cheaper, since time is ultimately the distinguishing factor. So, for the business model to work of being a premium Middle Eastern connector, you simply need to be the best. And although I won't go too much into this in today's video, since next week's video goes more into this, here we also have an explanation for why airlines offering non-stop service don't always have incentives to improve their onboard experience. The less traffic originating or ending in their hub city, the better their product needs to be in order to compete for connecting passengers. Now there's one last thing to explain here. Why is their economy class not as revolutionary as their business class or first class? This mainly comes down to the desire to appeal more to premium customers who are, in the end, the most profitable. Investing a lot in economy class doesn't pay off since these customers are usually more cost sensitive. So they simply respond to lower prices rather than a better product. Besides, connecting in the Middle East can actually be beneficial when flying economy, since it can break a 12-hour flight into 2 6-hour flights, allowing you to stretch your legs and have some real food between flights. In my experience, the reason that many people say Middle Eastern airlines have better economy class products is more a matter of their modern aircraft like A380s or A350s, rather than a vastly superior experience to, say, KLM or Cathay Pacific. So, in conclusion, Middle Eastern airlines are forced to be better than airlines offering non-stop service in order to compete for premium passengers. Price is usually not the biggest factor for these travelers, and for those who value comfort over convenience, the Middle Eastern airlines offer the best experience in the sky. Ultimately, this experience is made possible by the deep pockets and desire for prestige of their hub countries, so it's not like any country could just start an airline like this. But when it comes down to it, the Middle Eastern connectors have just the right combination to compete effectively. And as they say, a luxury once enjoyed becomes a necessity. Once you've tried them, you are hooked. As spring finally rolls around in the northern hemisphere, it's the perfect time to nail those photography skills on your iPhone so you can take the best possible photos this summer. There's a really easy